Welcome to Interviews of Grief, the show where we explore the depths of human emotion. I'm your host, Megan Pruitt. Grief is a universal experience that often hides in the shadows of our lives, rarely discussed openly. But it's through these heartfelt conversations that we find healing and hope. This is where we bring to light the story of those who have faced loss and the myriad of emotions that come with it. We're here to discuss the good, the bad, and the sometimes ugly aspects of grief as we seek to honor the memories of those we've lost and extend a helping hand to others navigating the same path. So join us as we embark on this profound journey, turning sorrow into strength, one conversation at a time. Welcome to Interviews of Grief. In this episode, we have the privilege of hearing from Mags Bossert, who tragically lost her mother and aunt, who were identical twins within a matter of days of each other. Mag shares her deeply personal journey through grief, courageously recounting some of its most challenging aspects. A trigger warning accompanies this episode, as Mags discusses topics of self-harm and eating disorders. If you or someone you know is experiencing thoughts of self-harm or struggling with an eating disorder, please seek help. Resources are available and you are not alone. Now, let's dive into Mag's story. Welcome to Interviews of Grief. I'm your host, Megan Pruitt. I want to thank so much and introduce to you Mags Bossert. She is joining us today. We connected on a Facebook group and your story kind of caught my eye. But unfortunately, it's a story that's all too uncommon in kind of the community of COVID loss. She lost her mom and her aunt in a short period of time. And I just want to thank you so much for coming on here and being willing to tell us your story, really.
Well, thank you for having me. I think it's just, stories that need to be heard, and it's important.
Absolutely. So go ahead and kind of like give me the backstory. Kind of like what happened, how did this all kind of go down?
Well, my mom and my aunt were identical twins.
Yeah.
And I mean, when I say identical, they always worked at the same place. They lived together most of the time.
Yeah.
I mean, they had the same haircuts. They got the same haircuts from the same stylist, same day. I mean, their names were Sharon and Sherry.
Wow.
I mean, they were so alike.
Yeah.
And they always had this saying that it was the womb to the tomb.
It's crazy.
They had always planned on dying together. And like, if one got sick, the other would be like, your aunt's sick. If she dies, it's that. Like, I go with her.
Yeah.
And so like that was always like they couldn't live without each other.
Yeah.
And that was, going into that, when my mom first got sick, we knew like if mom doesn't make it, auntie's not going to make it.
Yeah.
And they had a winter home in Florida together.
Mm-hmm.
That was right next to the winter home of their older sister.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they were very, very close, and they went down every winter. And I would go down before my girls got into school, I would go down with them for the whole winter.
Yeah.
And just, spend the winter with the twins. And that was, what I did from the time I graduated high school until my oldest got into kindergarten.
Right.
And so like, I wasn't able to be with them as much that my girls were in school, but, I was in Michigan and I started getting like these texts from my mom, like, I don't feel good today. And, they were just hunkering down there, just protecting themselves from COVID.
Yeah. And to put it into perspective, where were we at in the pandemic? Was it like very early on? Were we about midway through?
We were about midway through. It was 2021.
Okay.
So it was,
Yeah.
I mean, things had opened up. We had actually gone about 6 weeks earlier to visit them with the girls. And we had gone to Disney World, which like, I still have this like guilt about that. Like, you're in the middle of pandemic. We went to Disney World, but it was like our only chance to ever go.
Yeah.
So we took my mom there. So there's this guilt that like maybe I added to the pandemic. But at the same time, it was the last thing I ever did with my mom.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like this confusing. So yeah, we were like right in the middle. So things were opening up. The kids were back in school.
Yeah.
So it was kind of, it wasn't like right.
Yeah.
And they got sick in March. And in Florida, you could get the vaccine when you were 65.
Yeah.
They would have turned 65 in April. So they were so close. And their older sister had the vaccine.
Yeah.
So, I started getting these texts from mom, like, I don't feel good. I have a cold. It's driving me crazy. And I was like, Mom, just be careful. It could be COVID. Go to the doctor, go to the ER.
Yeah.
And she told me, she's like, no, you don't get a runny nose with COVID. And like, it was kind of like, and I remember telling her, I was like, Mom, that's going to come back to you in a week or two when you're diagnosed with COVID. I'm going to say, I told you so.
Yeah.
Like, and then, it was, it must have been around like the 10th. I kept getting this text from my cousin who was like, you have to call my mom, meaning my aunt.
Yeah.
And she called and she said that they were taking my mom to the hospital. They thought she was having a stroke, that she was really confused. She couldn't figure out where she was. She just was really out of it. And they were pretty sure it was a stroke.
Yeah.
So, I was calling people trying to figure out what was going on. They weren't sure what hospital they had taken her to. So, I was stuck up here with all this, trying to figure it out. Yeah, she wasn't answering her phone. And, it was just like this confusion of phone calls. And I finally got a hold of her nurse. And I said, my aunt called, said mom was acting like she was having a stroke. And she said, no, it's definitely COVID. And her oxygen stats were so low that it was, it had totally changed her mental status.
Do you know what they were at?
They were in the 70s, low 70s.
When my mom walked in she had gone to urgent care a bunch of times. She was at 45. I'm like, how did she walk? How did she get a sentence out of her mouth? Like, but you're right. It can kind of mimic almost like a stroke because of the confusion. They probably can't move certain parts of their body. So
yeah,
it was scary. It happens like this, right? It's just like out of nowhere.
Yeah, it was just insane out of nowhere.
Well, at least at this point, you're starting to get some answers. They figure it out pretty quickly, it sounds like.
Yeah. And they admitted her. And, I would call her and she couldn't breathe. She couldn't, I wasn't able to say anything to her. And she didn't have a phone charger. Mm-hmm. And everybody that she was with in Florida had ended up with COVID. So my aunt, my uncle, and my other aunt all were tested positive. Mm-hmm. So like, I'm in Michigan.
Yeah.
And nobody can get to my mom.
Yeah.
And the doctors kept telling me, even if you came here, there's nothing you could do.
Right.
So, and my dad was going through cancer treatments up here at the time.
Wow.
So I was it.
Yeah.
And then, she started getting worse and worse. And then I started getting calls of, have you talked to Auntie? Auntie's got to go to the hospital. Nobody's calling an ambulance for her. We can't get her there. And so finally, one of my cousins ended up calling 911 and being like, you have to get to my aunt's house.
Yeah.
So like at that point, we knew like, this is bad. This is.
Yeah.
And, we were talking to all these doctors and everything. And there was just nothing we could do. I was stuck. They had initially thought that my dad's cancer had metastasized to his brain. So there was no way that he could get there.
No.
And I have 2 little girls and my husband is a ER nurse. So he's working through COVID.
Yeah.
And it was just like this whole confusing thing. And we kept getting she's doing okay. She's doing okay. She's doing okay. And then I had put my girls to bed one night and I was, I was a wreck anyway. I just wanted to get to my mom. My mom was just my everything, and I hated that I wasn't there. And everyone kept telling me to wait, don't go down there. Let's see what happens. And then it was about like 10 o'clock at night. Everyone in my house was out, and my dad called and said, they just intubated your mom. And I knew then, like, she's not coming back. Like, it was, so I called my cousin and was like, well, first her daughters were like, I was like, you have to wake up your mom. And they're like, yeah, we don't wake up mom.
Like, no,
yeah, you wake up your mom. And so that's when I finally decided to go to Florida. Yeah. So the next day, it was middle of, it was March here, which, March in Michigan usually is still middle of winter.
Yes, I'm sure. Yeah.
So I didn't know where any of my clothes were. I didn't know where any of my summer stuff was. So my cousin had taken me to Walmart to, just get some capris and shirts and stuff. And as we were walking through Walmart, I saw this woman, I will never forget her. She wasn't wearing a mask, and she was arguing with the greeter at Walmart about it. And so badly, I just want to be like, my mom is dying. Put the damn mask on.
I know.
It was so frustrating. So that night, my cousin she took me to the airport. I said, my mom, when she was here, she was with my children.
Yeah. So
I was trying to explain to my girls who were first year of preschool and kindergarten.
Yep.
Nanny's sick. I'm going to go visit her. And, trying to figure out how to explain that to them.
Yeah. And
still have to leave them and, leave my husband here with them and
just go.
Yeah. Go. My mom and my aunt were my babysitters. They were the only people I trusted.
Yeah.
With my children, and my youngest daughter had been very sick for a long time. So, we didn't have a wide range of babysitters because I trusted my mom and my aunt. So all of a sudden they're thrown in with people that they don't know while mom's gone. And so I just went to the airport and, went there. And I had a cousin pick me up, and she took me to the hotel. And then my other cousins met me the next day. And then we just ended up in this holding pattern at this hotel. They wouldn't let us go to the hospital. They wouldn't let us in. We were getting conflicting stories about how they were doing. And it was just, we were just stuck at this hotel. And it was one of those hotels that it was kind of made for long-term stays. Where, construction workers and stuff stayed.
Mm-hmm.
So, we had our own little kitchen and stuff, but, I was just in this room knowing that my mom was dying and my aunt was dying.
And you're so close, but you're so far away.
So far away.
I know.
So far away. And we kept asking them, can you put them in the same room together? Can you get them together? And they were facing each other, and there was a glass wall between them, so they weren't together, but the hospital at least got them as close together as they could. And the doctor we were talking to, he kept explaining all these experimental things that he wanted to try. And he would say, the nurse would call me and be like, okay, we're going to pull life support today. You can come up to the hospital and you can see your mom for a minute, and then we'll pull life support. So I would get ready. I would get mentally ready. I'd have a ride with my cousins because we ended up with a car. And, we had the directions to the hospital and everything. And then the doctor would call and be like, oh, we're going to try this experiment. Or, oh, we're going to try and see if we can get her on ECMO and send her up to Orlando. And I kept being like, no, that's not I know she's gone.
Yeah.
She is gone.
Yeah.
Stop. It's, my mom is suffering up there. And at that point I wanted to get to her.
Yes.
even if it meant she was she was going to die. I knew it. Like, I just wanted to get to my mom.
Yeah.
And then, so he called and said, we're going to try this, so don't come up today. And then they had planned to pull life support the next day. So I'd gotten ready. I was ready to go. And they called again, and the doctor's like, we're going to try steroids. And I was like, no, I don't want this. He's like, well, sorry, your dad already approved it.
Oh, gosh.
And my dad didn't know a lot about medicine and stuff.
Yeah.
So they were calling him, and he was just kind of saying whatever you think is best.
Yeah.
And so then I had to wait another 48 hours. So we're still like in this holding pattern in this crappy hotel.
Yeah.
I'm away from my daughters.
Mhm.
And at this point, like, I was too upset to talk to them. If I got on the phone with them, I would just be a mess.
Lose it. Yeah.
Yeah, I would lose it. And I didn't want them to see that.
For sure.
So my cousin took me to a bookstore, and we bought a bunch of kids' books. And I would read them and make a video of it and send it to my husband. So, like, at this point, I couldn't even talk to my kids because it was just,
Yeah.
it was just too much. Like,
Yeah.
we were just, I was, eating food from 7-Eleven barely,
Yeah.
and just in this crappy hotel by myself most of the day,
Yeah.
and just waiting. And then I would be ready. I would get mentally prepared. Like, my mom, my best friend. Yeah, my everything is going to die today. I got it. And then I wouldn't have it. They would take it away. And so we did a conference call between my dad, who was up in Michigan, and the nurse and me, talking about when we were finally going to, pull life support.
Yeah.
And while I'm talking to them, I kept getting calls through my phone.
Mhm.
And they called like 4 or 5 times. I was finally like, something's going on. I'm hanging up the phone and calling this number back. And they're like, your mom's not going to make it the next 10 minutes. You got to get here. And we were 20 minutes away.
Oh, gosh.
So, I'm in my pajamas, and I just get my cousin from her room, like, we got to go.
Yeah.
And like, the whole time, like, my cousin's trying to comfort me, and I am just like, don't touch me. Like, I can't use it yet. And my other cousin met us up there, and they let my aunt's daughter sit outside of my aunt's room
Yeah.
while I went
the
into my
window.
mom's room.
Yeah.
And like, she was still breathing. And so it was, like, I was just sitting there. I was covered. I couldn't touch her.
Is she on the ventilator or no?
No, they had taken the ventilator off.
Okay.
They pulled the ventilator, and, she was so, like, I remember her face being so distorted.
Yeah.
And like, I was like, okay, I just gotta, what are your last words to your mom? And so, I just, told her, like, we're okay. You're, like, it's fine. And then like, she would stop breathing for a minute, and I'd be like, okay, she's gone. I can get out of here. Like, I just wanted to leave. And then she'd start breathing again. And like, it just sounded so painful. So I was like, Mom, you just gotta go. Like, you're ready.
Yeah.
I got this. Go. And like, I always felt bad that those were like, I'm sorry,
Well, go for it. It's okay. Trust me.
You're the first person I've told this whole story to ever.
Yeah. I
So,
remember when I told my story for the first time to another podcast lady, was like, I've never gone through all of this out loud yet.
yeah.
I was crying like a baby. Like,
And I'm not a crier. Like,
no, neither am
I
I.
stuff it.
No.
And so, like, I mean, my last words to my mom were just like, Mom, go.
Yeah.
Like, just let me out of here. And the nurse came and was like, she's gone. Do you want to sit with her? And like, it was so hot in that room. And like, she hated being hot, which I don't know why she went to Florida, but she always complained about it. So I was just like, I need out. And my cousin was still at her mom's, like in front of her mom's room, saying a rosary.
Yeah.
And like, she looked at me and she's like, is your mom gone? And I said, yeah. And she goes, Mom just opened her eyes for the first time in 4 days, the second your mom died.
Oh my God. Was your aunt ventilated or no?
Yeah, she was still on the ventilator.
Oh,
So it was the only time she had, and she was doing better than my mom at that point.
yeah.
So, you know, she woke up and she's like, she moved and she reached up.
That's insane.
Like, she hadn't moved for days and she opened her eyes and reached towards, you know, upwards.
That's incredible.
And so I was like, okay, I'm out. Like,
Yeah.
I got to get out of here. And my other cousin was waiting for me in a waiting room.
Yeah.
And I mean, I thought I was in there for hours. Like, I thought hours had passed.
Yes.
Like, she's gone already. I was like, already? I've been here forever.
Yeah.
And then she was like, no, you've been here 5 minutes.
That's crazy.
And I was like, okay, we got to go. Like, and she's like, well, we got to wait for everybody to get ready. I was like, no, you got to, like, don't touch me. Don't talk to me.
Yeah.
And then as we were getting ready to go, a nurse came and was like, we need you back. The doctor wants to talk to all of you. And our like instant thing was, oh my God, my aunt died.
Yeah.
Like, that's, you know, what we were thinking, that she had died.
Yeah.
And he called us back and we were in front of my aunt's room and he was just like giving us an update on how she was.
Okay. And you're standing next to your dead mom's room.
Yeah. She was still there. We could see her like in full view. She was gone. We could see her. And he's just talking about oxygen saturations and yeah, she's still doing okay.
I'm so sorry. Yeah.
It was just kind of like,
Yeah.
And then, you know, they asked if we needed anything. And I said, I cannot be the one to tell my dad that my mom died. Like, I'll call him, but can you guys call him first?
Yeah.
And like, there was like a nurse social worker there and stuff. So like, it was, you know,
yeah,
there were people there who could do that.
Yeah.
So we went back to the hotel and my cousin's like, what do you need? I was like, I just, you know.
Yeah, you don't even know what you need. Yeah.
Yeah, just leave me alone. Like, yeah. And, whew. And then my dad called and he's like, so how's it going? And then I was like, shit, sorry. Am I allowed to swear?
Yes, go for it. Yes.
Like, I was like, nobody called him.
Oh my God.
Nobody had called him. And I mean, it was at least a half hour between the time I had asked and the time I talked to my dad.
Yeah.
And so it was just one of those, like,
you had to deliver the news, the one thing you asked for.
Yeah, the one thing I needed.
Yeah.
Was to not, you know, they were married like 44 years.
Yeah.
So it was, you know, and I mean, he had to have felt so helpless.
I'm sure.
You know, going through cancer treatment while, you know, I mean, he couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
And I was the one that knew my mom's wishes.
Yeah.
I was the one that would know anything that she would want or need.
Yep.
And so, you know, I knew her views on life support and things like that. And that's why, you know, my dad wanted me down there.
Yeah.
Because he was like, I wouldn't, you know, my dad was uncomfortable talking about that stuff and my mom wasn't.
Yes.
So, you know, it was just, you know, all of a sudden I have to just tell my dad that, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, we had talked to the doctors a few more times and they said my aunt was stabilizing.
Wow.
So I was like, okay, I'm going to go home, talk to my kids, you know, regroup a little bit, and then I'll come back down.
Yeah.
For, you know, if something happens to my aunt, I'll come back down.
Yeah.
And leaving Florida, I had my cousin with me on that flight. Like the first flight down there was awful by myself.
Oh, yeah.
But my cousin flew back with me. And like leaving Florida was the hardest thing. Like,
I'm sure.
Like it got to the point where this hotel felt safe. Like I didn't have to deal with anything.
Yeah.
In this hotel room. but I had to go home, be a mom, be a wife,
Yeah.
talk to my girls about this.
Yeah.
And it was just, this crazy, I get home and I don't want to be there. And
There's
then,
something to being said too that like you took the trip home that your mom will never take again. Like, I thought about that too when I left Chicago. So my mom was in Chicago and I flew home. I'm like, never gonna happen again. You know,
she's not coming home.
Yeah.
Like she's coming home in a body bag on a plane,
Yeah.
which we still had to figure out.
Mhm.
Like, there was just so much that was left undone there. And I left a cousin and an aunt there dying.
Yes.
Like, but I had, my children up here who were not doing well. They knew something was wrong.
Yeah.
I'd never left them before.
No, me either.
Like, it was just this, what do I do? So I'm going to go home for a couple of days. I'm going to come back.
Yeah.
And I was looking for tickets to go back to Florida when I got the call that my aunt died.
Mm.
So like, and I mean, to me, growing up with a set of twins as mothers,
yeah,
I never knew until I was about like 9-10 years old that other kids didn't have two moms.
Yeah.
Like they were always together. They raised us as a unit.
Yeah.
So we never differentiated between my mom and your mom.
Yeah.
And I would ask other kids like, oh, where's your other mother at? And they'd look at me like I was crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, so losing my aunt was just like losing my mom.
Oh, I'm sure.
Like they were, so it kind of, it ended up being this Groundhog's Day of the same death. And then they had planned the same big Catholic funeral together.
Oh, wow.
So like we had to, do the same funeral 2 days in a row. And it was just, this whole blur. And in the middle of it, my youngest daughter got sick.
Yeah.
And she got home from the hospital about an hour before I had to leave for the funeral.
Mm.
So, I mean, it's, it's still just this like whole blur of,
absolutely,
people and, my daughter being sick and, my dad didn't know any of my mom's wishes or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm planning this big Catholic funeral and it's all down to me. What she would wear, what songs she wanted, what readings she would want, what she would want on the gravestone, how she would want the burial to be. It was all me. And I had to be on while having this really, really sick 3-year-old.
Yeah.
And, a 5-year-old who was just devastated.
Yeah.
I mean, she was devastated.
Yeah.
And it was just so much pressure.
Yeah. I know it. Your story like echoes so much of mine. So I went to see my mom and then there was like a period of waiting before like I left and then they pulled her off the ventilator later. And during that time, my son, my daughter, and my husband all got hand, foot, and mouth. And we're like so sick. That's where you're like hives everywhere and terrible fever. And thank God I had come home because my husband wouldn't have been able to care for the kids while he had it. I'd never seen him so sick. And I can just remember thinking like, it wasn't even thinking. I just had to go into like a robot mode, like keep the train moving. And like, meanwhile, my mom is literally like her days are numbered. And here I am just like going through the motions. And like, I think that's too why like being a mom or even just like maybe a parent is so tough when you're grieving and during that like anticipatory grief when you know it's coming.
Yeah.
You don't get to slow down. It was the quiet moments in my car when I was going to pick up the kids and at night when I could slow my mind for a second to think, oh my God, this is all going on, Like,
yeah, that's when you're not okay.
No.
Yeah.
Those are some, yeah.
It's just, I mean, you just feel numbed out and you're just going through the motions. And like, I kept telling myself, just be okay enough.
Yes.
You just have to be okay enough to get through this. And then you have to be okay enough to get through this. And
Yeah.
I mean, that's all I could do.
Absolutely. So how many days in between your mom and your aunt when they died?
My mom died on the 19th and my aunt died on the 23rd. So 4.
And did they pull your aunt off the ventilator also?
Yeah.
Or-
Yeah. So, and after my mom died, there was like a lot of like, people didn't want to say it, but we knew my aunt wasn't going to make it.
Yeah.
And there was this part that was almost like we didn't want her to make it at this point.
She'd be heartbroken without her sister.
She would be heartbroken. And at this point, with the lack of oxygen to her brain and stuff, she probably wouldn't go home even if she did survive.
I know.
Which is something that people never understood about COVID, is that it's, you know, if you're that sick with it, it's lifelong.
Absolutely. And the lungs can't heal themselves. They don't regenerate themselves. It's not like a liver that can recover from abuse. Like, your lungs are an essential organ. And once they are damaged, there's no coming back unless you can get a lung transplant or be really young and, you know, respond semi-well to ECMO. But even then, with people that I've talked to, they're like, maybe their husband was in their 30s. They went under ECMO just to die waiting for the lung transplant or for the lung transplant to being rejected. But that's like 1% of the population that even got to qualify for things like that. Like,
yeah, I mean, my aunt would have been in rehab without all her faculties.
I know it.
And it's this horrible thing of like, you want them to die now. Like,
no, I know.
But she would have hated us if we had let her live through that. At that point, she would have, like, I mean, there was no way that she would have lived without my mom.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, they even had plans that if one of them died in an accident or something, the other one would follow. It was their plan not to live apart.
Isn't that so crazy? And the story wrote itself out that way. Like, what are the chances?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. And like, it was almost a relief when my aunt didn't make it, because I mean, there was that, you know, that, oh my God, we still have one of them.
Yeah.
But she never would have made it without my mom.
Yeah.
I mean, I really think that they were one soul split into two people.
Yeah.
Is what I've always, and that's where it always came, where they were both my mother.
Yeah.
I mean, I could go to my aunt as much as I could go to my mom.
Yeah.
I mean, and I did. And I mean, if I wanted to go to my mom, I had to go to my aunt too, because she was there.
Yeah.
Like, it was, you know, I mean, they were very small women.
Yeah.
And they were just kind of like my two little buddies.
Yeah.
That just came together. They were always a package.
Yeah.
So, you know, I want my aunt so bad, but with mom gone, I'm never getting her back.
Yeah.
Is what it was at.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you ever kind of like go down the road? Like, I mean, maybe you have where you're like, well, what if my mom would have made it? Or what if just my aunt had made it? Like, what would life look like? And it sounds like for you, it just like wasn't an option. It's not how it was supposed to be. It's not how they wanted it to be. Like,
yeah, there was nothing that would have made it okay for just to have one of them.
It's so crazy.
Yeah, there was no way that they would have lived. I mean, they would have found a way out if one of them lived and the other didn't. They would have found a way out eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have this, you know, double back-to-back loss, and your entire world changes forever. Talk to me a little bit about like the grief, like, you know, shortly after, you know, after the funeral was done and like life seemingly goes back to normal. Like, how are you doing? And then especially because, it's March 4th now, I'm curious like how these days live in you, because I know for me, it was like the 1 year mark. I was just surviving. I was just trying to put one foot in front of the other. But year 2, I felt like I relived it all over again. I was like, okay, November, this date, she would have like called me and then she would have entered the ER and then I would have left South Carolina.
Yeah.
Like I felt like I lived it all over again until I gave myself permission. Like, you don't have to do this. It's already happened. You don't have to live it again. I know that these dates are like notable, but like how has it just been for you in general? Like, how are you doing?
I'm here, which is kind of like my answer to, I mean, right after everything, I had, my college years and stuff were very hard for me. I was anorexic. I had a lot of mental health problems. And I was in college without my mom. And it seemed like I reverted back to that.
Yeah, interesting.
I wasn't eating. I had lost like 55 pounds really fast.
Wow.
I was having like these flashbacks that, all of a sudden the world would melt away and I was in Florida.
Yeah.
And it happened one day while I had my daughter in the car. And my cousin had my other daughter and I was driving to pick her up. And all of a sudden I'm not there.
Yeah.
I am in Florida. And I finally hear my daughter calling me, asking me something. And I pulled to a stop sign. And I realized I don't know where I am.
Yeah.
I live in a small, small town.
Yeah.
Like you don't get lost. And this, my daughter had her appointment twice a week. And my cousin took my other daughter for this hour and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And I drove, it was 2 turns to get to my cousin's house.
Yeah.
And I'm completely lost.
That's crazy. Yeah.
And it was, terrifying that I had my daughter in the car.
Yeah.
And I wasn't seeing the roads.
Yeah.
Like I had to get my GPS out to get to my cousin's house when it's usually 2 turns.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
right.
it got to the point where I was doing anything not to feel it.
Yeah.
And anything not to think about it.
Yeah.
And it was getting dangerous where like I had this moment of I'm not safe.
Yep.
My children aren't safe with me because I am doing literally anything. Like I just didn't want to be back there.
Yeah.
And it would be extreme, as in like I'm starting to think about being in that room with my mom.
Yeah.
I have the oven on. I'll put my hand in the oven.
Yeah.
It was just, I have a knife in my hand. I will do anything with this knife not to be in Florida right now in my head.
Yeah.
And so it finally got to the point where I dropped my kids off to my cousin's house. And I told my husband, I'm not safe.
Yeah.
And he drove me to a psychiatric facility.
Yeah.
Which is, I had never been in one before.
Yeah.
And it was, and they took one look at me because it was about 2.5 hours away. Is the closest psychiatric facility to us.
Mm-hmm.
And they sent me right to the ER.
Yeah.
And like, because I hadn't been eating.
Yeah. You're probably delirious. Yeah.
I was delirious. My potassium was so low. Like I was on the verge of a heart attack. I mean, like grief almost killed me.
Yes.
I mean, it was scary that like I had almost put my daughters through what I had just gone through.
Yeah.
But I almost put them through it at 3 and 5.
Yeah.
So, there was like this big shift of like, something's got to give here.
Yeah.
Because my girls can't live like this.
Right. You don't want that for them. Yeah.
No. And I mean, at this point, it was all just living for them.
Yep.
Like if they would have given me the choice to get COVID and die with my mother, I would have.
Yeah.
I would have crawled in that bed and died with her.
Yeah.
But, and, you know, there was sometimes where like, I mean, resentment's not the right word, but where I'd look at the girls and be like, you know, if it weren't for you, I could be with my mom.
Yeah.
And it's like a terrible thing because they are my everything and they were my mom's everything. But it was just so hard to, you know, keep going through the motions
Yeah.
for them.
Yeah.
And it was exhausting. And it was, and, you know, now I'm so thankful for them because they are the only reason I'm alive.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
and, you know, I hate that resentment that I had that, like, you know, like, I mean, and it was just like these fleeting moments, like, of if I didn't have kids, I could just be with my mom and not feel this.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't like I constantly hated them or anything.
No. It was just you knew you were trying to still make it in the only way that you could for them. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was just, I had to live for them and be okay enough to be a good mom.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think in a way I'm still in that spot where,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, it's almost 3 years and, you know, I'm still in therapy.
Yeah.
Obviously, like, you need it. And,
Yes.
you know, like, and I think like after that second year, it's still like such a big thing for you as a person in grief.
Yeah.
And it's still there every day, but it's not for anybody else.
Yeah. I
Like
know
that first year, I was, you know, her mom died of COVID, her aunt died of COVID.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, everybody knew. And I still get to this, like, sometimes, like, even out at the bus stop the other day, a little girl's grandmother came and we got to talking about COVID. And she was like, did you hear about those twins that died a few years ago of COVID?
Yeah.
And I get that a lot because, I mean, my mom and aunt knew everybody.
Yeah. Small town. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll be, you know, I'll be with people, you know, who were like, you know, I went to Germany with these two twins and then they died of COVID. And I'll be like, yeah, I was there. Like, so
I'm
like,
still there. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, but after that second year, it's not, nobody's thinking about it every day like we do, I don't think. Like, I wake up and I still feel like the woman who went through all that.
Yes.
It's still there. Like, it's always at least on the back burner.
Yeah.
But it's not for the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And
that isolation is, I think, one of the absolute hardest aspects of COVID. And it has its like metamorphosis almost. Like, first of all, there's the isolation that our loved ones have to face because they're fighting for their absolute life alone.
Yeah.
And then there's isolation for us because you and I were in a different state.
Yeah.
And then there's the isolation of like nobody wants to talk about COVID.
Yeah.
And then there's isolation. I don't think in the community of COVID enough of us are talking about it and telling our story. And like we don't have a day to remember it by, you know, like
that's always been a big thing. Like, I went to this grief group for a while that met on September 11th.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we were talking about it and I was like, COVID is the biggest national disaster we've ever had.
I know.
And it was made into a joke.
Yeah.
Politically, it was a mess.
I know.
Like, you know, we have this whole day for September 11th, which we should.
Of course.
I mean, no doubt, but
where are we?
Where are we? Where are these people who died alone?
I know.
Without their families? Like, why aren't they remembered?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and they're really they're the heroes that if our loved ones didn't go through this, they wouldn't have known what worked, what,
I know.
You know, like they wouldn't have known. Yeah. I mean, our loved ones were the guinea pigs.
I know.
And experimented on because it was new and that's all they had. And
yes,
you know, they died these horrible deaths. And I mean, the numbers are just
insane. And then when you take that number and then you multiply it, let's just assume that like 2 people loved that one person. And so then you multiply that out. It's the numbers. You cannot even fathom how many of us there are, you know.
It's astronomical.
It really is, without any sort of like unified voice purpose. Like, you know, at a minimum, we were able to collect like burial insurance or burial money if you died of COVID-19 from the government. Like, how about some like aftercare? Like, and especially, could you imagine, like, you know, we're our age, we're a mom. Can you imagine like these kids that lost their parents? And it's just like, it's just, I feel like we're forgotten. But like, my resounding message and like why I'm doing this is that like, we're not forgotten and none of us are alone. And I want to preface too that that's not just a feeling of like COVID loss, like suicide, because nobody wants to talk about it.
Yeah.
So many survivors of suicide, especially the children, kind of are like, I just feel alone, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like grief is something that we're all going to face, but no one like really talks about it. And I just think, you know, my journey was I went to a grief share group. I had grown up like in a Christian home, but I wasn't like go to church every day, you know, like pray before a meal. It wasn't like that. And we had moved around so many times, we like hadn't found a church. And I went to this grief group and I met so many people. And it was a variety of losses. There's definitely, you know, some people in there that had lost somebody to COVID, but it was like talking about it made that feeling of like, I'm not alone. Other people have gone through like worse, or they know exactly how I feel.
Yeah.
And then it was the validation of like this PTSD and these like hard images that I'm seeing are normal and they will go away with some work, you know, or become more manageable. And it's just like, I just want people to know that like you're not alone in this, because grief is so isolating. It really is.
It really is. And it's so different for everybody.
Yeah.
Like, and I would see like, you know, I mean, probably a lot of the problems I had early on are because I'm not a crier. I stuff it down. I'm not a talker.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've always been like a mental health advocate. So
yeah,
like I didn't put that on myself you know, but there was this, you know, everybody reacts differently to grief.
Absolutely.
And it's been, you know, you hear about these 5 stages of grief all the time.
Yeah.
And if you're not in one of those stages or not working through it, you feel like you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, but you're not. And those stages can come and go based on the day, based on the moment. Like I remember I had been doing fine for a while and I read this article. I think it was Texas was trying to propose a new means of the death penalty of oxygen deprivation.
Oh,
like, God. Holy shit. Like they're going to kill inmates the way that my mom died. And they ultimately ruled that it was too inhumane to even kill death row inmates. And that like sent me back for a little while. Like, holy shit, they wouldn't have even put like a, you know, a mass murderer down the way that my mom went. And it's just like little things. And that those stages of grief, I think people think that they're linear, like you're going to go through this one and this one and this. No, at some point you're going to experience each of them, but they're going to come and go, or maybe you won't have one stage at all. You know, like it's just not.
Yeah. One of my therapists showed me, it was like a U-shaped stages of grief.
Oh, interesting.
Have you seen, I can send it to you later.
Yeah, I would love that.
But it had more of like, how you are doing.
Yeah.
And it had a lot more stages. I mean, it must have had like 20, 30 stages on there.
Interesting.
That made so much more sense. And it was like a really sharp kind of U.
Yeah.
And she's like, imagine a ball on that U-shaped. If you're on a ball, you're going back and forth like this.
Yeah.
You're going back and forth through the stages.
Yeah.
And there's, you know, kind of no end to it, where in the 5 stages that we typically learn about, there's acceptance, it's over.
Yeah.
Once you reach acceptance, you accept it, you're good.
Yeah.
But this, you know, U-shaped idea,
yeah,
you know, kind of it gives you permission to be where you need to be at the time.
Yes.
And that's what I always
Absolutely.
hung on to.
Yeah, I would love if you'd send that to me. And also the kind of like analogy, and I've said it on another podcast, I'll say it again. I feel like grief at first is like your newborn baby. Like you've literally just like gotten a baby that you've been out, with for a period of time, and you're exhausted and you come home and you have no idea what you're doing, but you're just going to like figure it out.
Yeah.
You're in a daze. You're not eating. You're not like taking care of yourself great because you are now responsible for this like baby.
Yeah.
And as this baby gets older, like maybe you get a little bit more in your groove at like 2, at 4, you feel more comfortable like leaving it alone. And it's just something that you grow into. But it's like a part of you. It's never going to leave. It's always going to be there. But in some ways for me, I think because I've talked about it so much and I've gone and done a lot of work, that it's like, I feel like it was a boulder and now it's like a rock that I carry around, and I'll carry it around for the rest of my life. But through talking about it and like healing, it helps. There's still bad days, of course, but just talking to people and like.
Have you seen the jar analogy?
No.
It's like, so like it shows like you have this grief as a big ball or rock, as you described it.
Uh-huh.
And the grief never changes. And it shows like, I mean, like the memes or whatever you see of it shows it getting put into a bigger jar.
Oh,
as if the person grows around it.
Yeah.
Like your grief does not change. Your grief is always huge.
Yeah.
But you're able to grow around it and live around it.
Yes, absolutely. And it's so important also for us as moms to do it, because we cannot, like, it's so cliche, but we cannot pour from an empty cup. If I am empty, I have nothing else to give my kids, my husband, my work. Like, you have to at some point in the grief journey be like, this isn't working, or like, whatever. I need to take care of myself, and that's what you did. And some people don't find their way out of that. So
and I really I think it needs to be okay for people to get there before I did. Before, I mean now mostly they're covered with tattoos, but I mean I have scars of what I've done to myself in that grief, and I have, and I mean, I definitely killed my metabolism. I killed any chance of, gaining, losing weight. Like, I really hurt myself in this grief journey. Because I had to be a mom. I had to be okay. And, I just needed somebody to tell me it is okay not to be okay right now.
100%. It still is. It always will be. Yes.
Yeah. And, as a mom, we don't get that luxury. We're going to get judged. We're going to get, I mean, everything we do, there's a magnifying glass on it as a mom.
Yeah.
And you think, it was so hard to even buy my kids summer clothes that year.
Oh God. Yeah. Just the weirdest things, right? That never held weight in your life. And now you have to go do them, and it's like torture.
It was terrible. And I remember I'd have these days where all the kids in the neighborhood would be over, and I would just be bombarded by, trying to keep all these kids happy as they were running around the neighborhood and keeping track of, who is where. And it was just so overwhelming and so big.
Yeah.
And, my mom and my aunt were always the people I went to with big things.
Yes.
I mean, when my daughter was sick, she was chronically sick for a few years. My mom and my aunt were there.
Yeah.
They were in the hospital. They were babysitting. I could call them and talk for hours.
Yeah.
And they were a lot of they were my social life. It was I would, even in high school and stuff, I would ditch my friends to hang out with my mom and my aunt.
Yeah.
And I didn't care.
Oh,
you're hanging out with your mom. And then I'd be like, you know what? Come meet my mom.
Spend some time. Yeah.
And then, all of a sudden, my mom is a mom to everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, she would, everybody loved my mom. And it was to the point where, like, in high school, people would be like, hey, I hear your mom's really cool. Can I come hang out with you guys?
Oh.
Like, she had a reputation for being the cool. Okay, I mean, cool is not quite the right word for my mother, but being, the warm,
Yes.
loving woman that,
Yeah.
and my friends were used to that. Like, hey, you want to hang out? Well, I'm hanging out with my mom and my aunt. You can join.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's how it was. So they were my whole social life.
Yeah.
And, we live in a small town. So, I mean, not a tiny town, but everywhere was connected to them.
Yeah.
There's our beach, and then there's our mall. And so it's
Probably everywhere you go, you have some sort of memory too tied to it.
It was just this feeling of losing everything.
Yeah.
Like, I lost my balance.
Yes.
And they were, they were kind of the center of our world a little bit.
Yeah.
Where, even out to the extended family, everything revolved around them. We spent the summer at my aunt's pool. We, all the traditions were based on what the twins did.
Yeah.
And with the twins gone,
what does this look like now? Right.
Like, I spent that whole first summer after they died just, blowing in the wind.
Yeah.
And I mean, my husband is a nurse during COVID, and I mean, God bless him. He was amazing to me.
Yes.
And he put up with a lot, but I'm a stay-at-home mom who dog walks on the side.
Yeah.
Like, he had to work. He couldn't be home with us.
Right.
All the time. He couldn't watch me and make sure I was okay. He couldn't,
And did he go through with his job? Like, was he ever caring for COVID patients? Did he kind of like have to have his own process of this too, or?
Yeah. He definitely had a lot of COVID patients.
Yeah.
And he saw a lot of the struggles. And I think especially with ER nurses.
Yeah.
That it's so quick. They have
treat
them and street them kind of idea where, they stabilize a patient and they send them off.
Yeah.
And so I don't think he never got a whole story on a patient.
Yeah.
And I think that made it hard for him to see my whole story.
Yeah. See it to the end. Yeah. I would imagine so.
Yeah. Because with him, it wasn't, ER nurses never have time to form that relationship or know that story.
Right.
Like, they are definitely treat them or street them.
Yeah.
He stabilized patients and sent them up.
Yeah. His job was to be the revolving door. Nobody was going to stay there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think he really, and I think he always felt bad that he couldn't be there.
Yeah.
That, like, I went through this huge thing that, he could never really fully grasp, and he couldn't fully be there with me in that.
Yeah.
That, like, and I mean, this poor man tried everything. I mean, he bought me a tortoise on my mom's birthday. The first, I mean, he spent $500 on a tortoise for me.
Trying to cheer you up.
Yeah. He's like, you know what? We're going to make your mom's birthday a happy thing. Yeah. And, like, we drove like an hour to get my tortoise. Like,
yeah.
I mean, he really tried, and he took the girls whenever he could.
Yeah.
And gave me a break. And I mean, he would even take them to, on like overnight trips just so I could sleep and just wallow.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he was a great husband through it.
For sure.
But I think there was always this disconnect of, he's an ER nurse, he stabilizes it, he sends it off, and it's done.
Yeah.
He couldn't stabilize this.
Yeah. Wow.
He couldn't keep it going. and send it off and have it be okay and not be a problem anymore.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel like so many people say there's like the person they were before the grief and after the grief. And I like feel like I shouldn't have gone through loss until later in life. Now I feel like so many people have gone through even worse, but I feel like I should have said goodbye to my mom maybe in my 40s or,
Yeah.
late 40s, 50s, hopefully. I mean, God willing. And so I just feel like not bad, but I have had this thought where I'm like, I'm really sorry that my husband has to get this version of myself so young in life. Like there's times when I'm just heavier. I feel this like responsibility and this like weight, and I'm just not this like same woman that I was before. Does that make any sense? Do you identify with that at all?
That makes 100% perfect sense.
Yeah.
Like we shouldn't be these people yet. Like,
Yeah.
and there's a point where like, I mean, everybody loses their mom.
Yes, a parent, yes. Or
Yes,
somebody, yes.
Yeah, everybody will eventually lose their mother unless they die prematurely. Like,
Yeah.
that's the order of things.
Yeah.
But not in our 30s. And
No.
not, and it's totally changed who I am.
Yeah.
And I think even more frustrating to me is it changed the trajectory of my children's lives.
Yes.
They have a mother that they weren't supposed to have.
Yeah.
And they have this big traumatic loss in their lives.
Yeah.
That they can't, that their brains aren't developed enough to handle it.
Right. Right.
And, my oldest daughter, she still won't talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
If my youngest daughter starts talking about my mom, she goes into complete panic mode, like covers her ears, cries.
Yeah.
And, my youngest daughter is like, she's making plans for when I die.
Mm.
Like the other day, she's like, okay, mommy, so I'm going to have a baby when I'm 15.
Oh, gosh.
I was like, oh, bad idea. No, like
Yeah.
back that up. Like, why would you have a baby when you're 15? She's like, okay, so you like babies. And if you're going to die when I'm in my 30s and I have babies when I'm 15, then you can be a grandma all the way till they're teenagers.
Yeah. Like putting the pieces together that she shouldn't even know.
Yeah. And I was like, what makes you think? She's like, well, you're in your 30s and you don't have a mom.
Yeah.
And I don't have my nanny. So if I have the babies early, and I mean, she's 7 years old coming up with it.
How is she even thinking about that?
Yeah. Like, and I mean, it came so out of the blue.
Yeah.
Like she was just sitting there playing with toys and like, just like, she had to be ruminating.
I know.
To come up with that she had done the math in her head.
It's crazy.
That, if she had babies when she was 15, I could be a grandma until those babies are teenagers before I died. Like, no 7-year-old should be able to do that.
No.
And she wouldn't have been able to do that if it had never happened. And, and sometimes it does feel like there's definitely people to blame for it.
Yeah.
Like, there were people that weren't careful.
Yeah.
Close to my mom.
Yeah.
That thought it was a big hoax that, like it does feel in a way that like, I mean, murdered is too strong of a word.
Yes.
But there's like, for like,
I know.
But for this wouldn't have happened.
Yes. And I literally say my mom's death certificate had 3 causes of death. It was like COVID-19, COVID pneumonia, and lung failure. And I always say the 4th should have been, and I put it on her. I wrote a book about my mom. I put her death certificate is the book cover. And the 4th cause is political and medical mistrust. And I am to the point where I don't give a shit. I don't blame the Republicans, the Democrats. I blame everyone. Everyone played a piece of this puzzle to make her nervous to not get the vaccine. And then she made those choices. And it's just like the climate of the world killed people.
Yeah.
And one thing that really gets me too is that I don't think that there was a strong enough correlation between BMI and risk to COVID. I know they would say like, older age, overweight, that's one of those risk factors, but nobody really knew just how bad it was attacking. Like my mom, she was just a little short Italian woman. She carried her weight well, but she was overweight. And we didn't
that's exactly how my mom and my aunt were.
Yes, in the picture, I was like, this looks like my mom, like the same like kind of build. And I just don't think it was talked about enough of how much at risk that population was.
Yeah. I mean, they should have, I would have loved to have just kept her in a little bubble.
I know.
And just kept her safe because she was so at risk.
Yeah.
And I mean, she was in Florida of all places where
I know, we're free for all.
Yeah. I mean, because when we were at the hotel and the closest place to walk to was a 7-Eleven.
Yeah.
Like the cashiers weren't wearing masks.
No.
And they would be like, they'd be like, oh, let me guess, you're from one of those, Democratic states. Like it was a joke. Like when, my dad had heard, and he had told me this as kind of like a half joke.
Yeah.
But he had heard on the news, and like my dad is a very, very smart man, but it was kind of like a half joke, but might as well try it because you're there. Yeah. But he had heard that if you're around people with COVID, drinking alcohol would help clear the germs out. And he knew it was bunk.
Yeah.
But he was like, kind of like, you know what? You're there. You're stuck. You got your cousins with you. Get some alcohol. Kill the COVID germs.
Yeah.
And when they carded me at 7-Eleven and saw I was from Michigan, like they were teasing me. Like, oh, governor let you out of there. You're going to be able to get back in with those libtards. And
God, Jesus.
And it was like so frustrating being like, my mom is dying down the street of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you are making fun of me for having a mask on.
Everyone should have been so united. Like you could use the September 11th. We all just came together as a country, and it wasn't about a political party or information that was not real. We could have all just come together, and it could have looked so different. That's what I believe in my heart. It could have been so different.
They made such a joke out of what we were going through. They politicized our pain.
Yeah.
And they, there's nothing of this, huge loss that we've had because it's still a fight.
Yeah.
Nobody sees that, these COVID victims are part of this national, we're nothing where September 11th victims were supported.
Yeah. And do you think about this too? Like if somebody like lost their loved one to cancer or something, maybe in their life, in their immediate circle, maybe one other person will get cancer. But like how many times have you had a loved one now get COVID where you're like, that they're going to be okay. It's not the same variant, but it's like still you have to have all these people in your life and yourself. I've had COVID 3 more times since my mom is gone. It's like, I have to like live through this again. Like, are you kidding
it keeps
me?
Getting replayed. And, people, and, thinking of the cancer analogy, because my dad has cancer, stage 4, and he's doing really well. And there was a time that he wasn't doing well and we were preparing for his death.
Yeah.
The cancer death and the COVID death are so different. And you cannot compare planning for a cancer death, which thank God I didn't have to go all the way through, but we went pretty far into, making those plans, and then, he stabilized. But the idea of this, cancer death where everybody comes around the person, and
Yeah.
There's this unity in it where everybody was around my dad, and he had nurses coming into his home
Yeah.
that are he's dating one of them now, but
Yep.
like
You can see it coming.
Yeah, you can see it coming. And there's time where I have pictures of my girls with my dad while he was in the wheelchair and bald and skinny and full of sores. Like,
Yeah.
I had those pictures, and I was able to explain it to my girls, even though they were really young.
Yeah.
And, there's this big difference between this isolated cold COVID death.
Yeah.
That people just aren't seeing it. So, you get that, well, my mom died too of cancer. And sometimes I think how lucky you are to have lost your mom that way.
I know.
Like,
quantify luck, it's just wild.
Yeah.
Like,
and
what I wouldn't have done to know that she had cancer, to like take her to her appointments, to get to have lots of beautiful last moments. Like, yeah, it's so different for everybody. It's wild.
I was working for this family. I was walking their dog,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a elderly lady who was in her late 90s, 96, 97. And she had gotten COVID.
Yeah.
And I was the one to find her when I went to walk the dog. And she was almost dead in her bed.
Oh my God.
And I called the people at her home. She was living in a like assisted living facility that was for, and I was like, you guys have to call an ambulance. She is almost dead. I called my husband up to help me, and then she was in rehab for a really long time. I had her dog. And when she got back into the facility, her family still didn't seem to get it. Like, they weren't visiting her. They weren't taking her out. Like, she was so lonely that, like, she would keep me there for hours. I mean, I was supposed to walk her dog for 15 minutes, and I would end up staying 2-3 hours just chatting to her.
She had somebody.
Yeah. And one day I saw her daughter kind of yelling at her that, like, Mom, come on, you're making a big deal out of this, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And I finally said, if I had the opportunity that you had to not only have your mother until she is 96, but to have her survive COVID.
I know.
You know what I would be doing? I would be rejoicing. God. I would be here every day. Your dog walkers are taking more care of your mom than you are.
It's that perspective.
Yeah.
It's that perspective that I never wish I had, but I am happy to have it because there are now so many areas of my life that I don't take for granted. There's tough conversations that I would have never had with people that I love. We're in the process of like doing all of our own estate and will planning. And I'm in some twisted, sick way thankful. Like, I put in a note into my medical POA that if 2 assigning physicians give me less than a 30% chance of meaningful recovery, that I want care ended. I don't want anybody dragging anything on.
No.
It's the worst in the world, and it's just like this perspective. And that to me has like led to being, I have to be thankful for it because all of this couldn't have been for nothing. You know what I mean? Like,
oh yeah,
I cannot let her death be like a waste. There had to be something like learned from it. I have to do things differently. I want to honor her, and like, I don't have to be the same person as I was before, but I've got to. That's why I want to, do the work and talk to people and give a voice to this, because you can come out the other side of it,
Yeah.
So I think we've established pretty well, that the 7 stages of grief look better in that U shape. What if you had to give yourself 3 words to describe your current state of grief right now? What would they be?
I would still say, like, it's still physical.
Yeah.
It's still something that you physically feel.
Yeah.
And it's still and it's constant. It's just like this visceral, constant, all-encompassing,
Yeah.
you know, it's like a thing. It's just like a thing that you carry.
Yeah.
Like a visceral, physical thing that you carry and you stuff down and you hide.
Yeah.
And you just, you know, I mean, I'm definitely so much better than where I was.
Yeah.
And I finally, just last week, I mean, my world stopped turning without my mom and my aunt. And, you know, I stopped doing art. I stopped reading books. And I just, you know, threw myself into caring for my children.
Yeah.
Because there was this, the kids are the reason I'm alive. The kids need me.
Yeah.
And I will do whatever I can. And so, you know, the other day my girls wanted to do an art project and I got all the stuff and we went shopping for it. And then, of course, like I get it all out, we start, and my girls, the neighbors come over and want to play. And my girls leave me. Oh my God, you guys just ditched me after I, you know, put this stuff
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. They have no clue. Yeah.
Yeah. And before I would have just cleaned it up and like left it, but I finished what I had started. Like
Good.
I did my first art project in almost 3 years,
Yeah.
which I mean, I lost a lot of skill, but
That's all right. It will come back.
yeah, like
And it's more
starting.
important that you did it. You did
Yeah,
it.
I did it. I sat there and I did it, and it felt so wrong, but so
Yeah.
like it felt wrong to like go back to who I was before this all happened.
Yeah. And it felt like you were moving on maybe without them.
Yeah, like it didn't feel, you know, and I bought a book the other day because
Yeah.
you know, it was just my mind has never been there enough to read a book
Yeah. To
since my
steady.
mom died. Yeah, I'm just too tired by carrying at the end of the day that I just want to go to bed.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's not really like this acceptance part. It's just slowly taking things back that you lost.
100%. And giving yourself small wins. It doesn't have to be like all at once overnight. It can be, you know, completing the art project. And that's, give yourself credit for it, you know? And it's just like introducing things back into your life because your life is still going to move on. You know, that's the weirdest thing to reconcile. She's done, and now I have to move on.
Yeah.
And I said it in my mom's eulogy. Like, I did not realize until she was gone, and it was like 4 a.m., and I'm sitting writing her eulogy, and I'm talking about what a safe harbor she was for me. And like, I've taken a lot of risks, like professionally, and I felt like the sky was the limit. And she made that for me.
Yeah.
And it was like, now I have to do that for my kids. And it's not to like sugarcoat it either. There's things that I want to do differently. There's things that I want to replicate exactly the same way, but like reconciling now that like she's gone and like my life is still going to continue on, you know. And I watched my mom, she lost her mom, and not at an early age. My grandma was like in her 90s, but she never recovered from it.
No.
And I mean, the last Christmas I spent with her, my grandma had been gone years and years and years. And my mom was just bawling hysterical on Christmas. And I'm like, I didn't have any reference point of that pain, but I was like, Mom, please, like for the kids, like try and hold it together, or like, but she was always just so stuck in the grief. And I think that's been a driving factor too, that like, I don't want to get stuck in it. You know, I want to go through it and the hard things. And it's just,
my mom, it was very, very similar actually, that like she lost her mom and her sister and her brother and her dad, like while I was in high school.
wow.
So she had like these very, very big losses. And they did really get stuck there.
Yeah.
To, you know, like, and, you know, so it was, they had lost 3 of their siblings and their parents, and there were 3 siblings left. And, you know, like Christmases and stuff became like these memorials.
Yeah.
To, you know, the people that we had lost. And, you know, my grandmother was like in her 70s
Yeah.
and stuff. So, I mean, they weren't like these, my aunt that died, her sister was only 48, but, you know, there were all these, you know, like I had watched my mom's grief for years
Yes.
during like high school and, you know, the early years in college.
Yeah.
And my mom came to me with her grief.
Yes.
Very
Yes.
much so. Like my mom and I were attached, we shared, and that was it.
Yeah.
And so like, and it got to a point where like it was almost annoying.
Yes. I know.
Like, Mom,
I
if
know.
you cry at Silent Night one more time,
I know.
like I'm gonna take your Josh Groban CD away.
Yeah.
Like you don't get it. Like
I know. Like you can't handle this. Yeah.
yeah, you can't. And I didn't want to be like that and put my grief on my kids either. So it's a hard spot to like.
I know.
And I think, like that generation was just taught to deal with it differently.
Absolutely.
Like
100%.
I would beg my mom to go to therapy.
Same.
Like,
Same,
Mom,
same.
even get
Please.
a book about grief. Just
Just go and talk about it.
yeah. And I mean, she'd try every once in a while, and she definitely, like, she never had a problem with somebody else going to therapy. But like for her,
To get her there, she just couldn't find her way.
she just couldn't find her way.
My mom
Like,
never did either. Yeah.
Yeah, she had her sisters.
Yeah.
And they deal with it in their little group together.
Yeah.
And I think, especially with these COVID deaths that, were so traumatic that we need more support. We need, like, I think that therapists need to be trained in how to, there needs to be
100%.
new training. I mean, my therapist is amazing, but,
This rewrites the rules.
Yeah, it rewrites just like September 11th did. And I know I keep coming back to that analogy.
No, but I do too. That's so interesting that you do that because I do too.
Yeah, that, there was this huge national disaster. And I was actually in a Muslim country during September 11th.
Oh, wow.
But, there's this huge national disaster and there's memorials to it.
I know.
You can go to a place if you lost somebody on September 11th. You have somewhere to go. You have funds. Like, I mean, my hospital bills from the psychiatric facility.
Yeah.
We owed like $7,000-8,000.
I know.
After insurance.
And it's not right.
Yeah. I mean, it's not something I did. I mean, there's a, part I have to take responsibility and say I did not handle my grief well in the early days, but if this COVID thing wasn't a huge mess, I wouldn't have needed to spend.
I know. Well, and I'm trying to cover a wide variety of losses, but you'll be my second COVID related, third. And I would love to know some statistics because now out of 3, 2 had an absolute psychiatric break. The other person that I interviewed, she saw a garbage bag. She had worked at a nursing home. She had lost her mom and her grandmother, and she saw a garbage bag on the street. And between the trauma of the loss of her mother and her grandma, and then all the people at the nursing home, it wiped out the entire nursing home except for like 2 or 3 people. She saw a garbage bag on the street and thought it was a body bag and just broke. And it's like, how many of those stories are there? Because if it's the majority, then there should absolutely be a plan of action, because there's too many of us, period.
Yeah.
And too many of us were failed by the institutions that we were supposed to trust in. And then just even the medical mistrust, there was like instances of people not trusting doctors anymore. And it was just the whole thing.
Like there was this whole, when I first started looking into talking to other people and finding grief groups, there was this huge mistrust of, the medical system.
Yeah.
And then I started thinking back to it. And, while we were going through everything in Florida,
Yeah.
there were these things that stuck out that never felt right.
Yeah.
That, really, like, when my dad called and told me that my mother had been intubated, I was like, what happened? I asked what happened, obviously. And he was like, she got worse and she was intubated. And then I had gotten into her portal, into her charts.
Yeah.
And she had actually pulled off her BiPAP in her sleep and coded.
Oh my God.
And they did not have anybody in this big metropolitan COVID ICU to intubate her. They called an ER doctor.
That's crazy.
Intubate her. So she was without oxygen for a very, very long time. But we were never told.
Yeah.
And, all these times that they were about to pull life support, and I was ready. Today's the day. I mean, in my head, it is like, today's the day I sign the papers, I kill my mom. I'm ready. I can do it. I'm prepared. I didn't sleep last night. I'm wired. I'm over caffeinated. I can kill my mom today.
Yeah.
And then they'd pull it back and say, well, we're going to try this.
Yeah.
And they tried to get her on ECMO when she was 65, not in the best of health. I mean, she would have lived a long time if she hadn't got a COVID, but she was on blood pressure meds and things like that. Like, she didn't meet the requirements for ECMO, but they were still trying.
Yes.
And then when that didn't work out, when the universities wouldn't take her, we're going to pull the plug today. And as I'm on the way to do this whole thing again that I had prepared for twice now, they called and said, we're not doing it today. We're going to try this treatment. We're going to try steroids.
Oh my God. A huge high dose. That's what they did for my mom.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I personally have the feeling that they were calling my dad, because my dad had told them multiple times, call Mags. She knows what Sherry wants.
Yeah.
But then they'd call my dad and say, you have to decide now, you don't have time, and put him on the spot.
Yeah.
So, once I started delving into this, there was this, this whole mistrust of, they wouldn't let me get to my mom.
Yeah.
I have at least 7 days where I do not know what happened to her.
Yeah. It's wild.
I don't know how she was treated. I was told not to get on a plane to my mom by medical staff.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do. Do not come here.
God.
Like, you do have that huge mistrust of what happened to her.
I know.
Because I could never talk to her. She would answer the phone.
Yeah.
But she could never breathe enough for, So I would just keep yelling, I love you, Mom. I love you. I love you. I love you. Until a nurse came and hung up the phone.
Oh my God.
But I would never get a response back from her.
Yeah.
So I have all these days that I don't know what happened to her.
I know.
And it does lead me to really mistrust.
I know. And it's too, like, I just wonder if we could have been an advocate and been there for her. Do I think it would have saved her? No. I think the COVID got in her lungs, and I think they tried everything that they could, but could the course of history gone a little differently? And I'll just give like an example. She had to be so heavily sedated.
Yeah.
And some people can be on a ventilator and have their eyes open and write you a message. And some people have to be on the most serious, heaviest drugs that, are insane. And so they would try to wean her off the sedation. They needed to see if they could get her off the sedation. And every time all hell would break loose, she would be in a panic and they'd have to re-ventilate her or re-sedate her.
Yeah, that's just.
So it was just like, if I could have been there, and I don't know if I would have wanted to see it. That's where I get so conflicted. Like, God, that might have traumatized me to the hills. But if I could have been like, it's okay, calm down. And I told them, I said, she's an anxious person by nature. Are you trying to like reassure her? Like, Anne, you're okay. Like, you're in the hospital, because she probably.
I have a feeling our moms could have been friends.
Yeah.
So
And maybe they are now, right?
yeah, I
Wouldn't
hope
that be
so.
cool?
But they're,
Gosh.
yeah, I mean, just to know, like, I mean, for you having to hear that your mom was terrified. I
And
mean,
yeah, I had also convinced myself that when she went on that ventilator, that her soul left her body. Like this was it. She was being medically kept alive. If it were up to like her own body, then she would have gone and she would have been with God. And so
yeah,
I convinced myself of that. And I'll never forget. It was like this nurse, because you talk to a million different people. There's not a whole lot of, reoccurring shifts and
yeah.
things like that. And so the woman was like, yeah, we went into your room. And I swear to God, I had convinced myself she was gone. She was just a vessel. It was just a body.
That's exactly how
Yes.
once I heard that she had coded
Yeah.
and there wasn't this easy, your mom's being intubated, we made the choice, she got a little bit worse. But like once I knew she coded, I had that,
Yeah.
I mean, almost verbatim that same, I mean, you used the word vessel and in my head it was a shell,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
she's gone.
They, exactly. The nurse goes, yeah, I went in and your mom's eyes were wide open and she's looking all over the room. And I'm like, holy shit. She is still inside of there, trapped. And that's when this all turned to torture to me. But I wasn't her medical power of attorney. There was nothing I can do. Family had to go through their own process. And I don't resent them for it. But I felt like, oh my God, she's still in there. And then when they pulled her off the ventilator, I watched my mom pass away on FaceTime. Her eyes, for the first time in like 30 days, were wide open. And she was there. And if we would talk to her, her heart rate would go up. And then we would stop talking and her heart rate would stabilize. And then it eventually started to feel like I was torturing her. So my husband and I stopped talking so that she wouldn't try to still hang on. And to just know that she was still in there is just a wild feeling. Like,
yeah. That's what, I always wondered is, how much was she aware of this? Like, I mean, her body was tortured, but was she tortured too?
I know.
There's that whole part of not knowing what happened and that, I mean, it was to the point where I couldn't talk, like I didn't have that FaceTime. They never gave me that option to FaceTime her, or so there were just days where I had no contact with her.
I know.
And was just, there was one day they let us, and it always felt really weird. I had told them to stop proning my mom.
Yeah, me too. It wasn't helping.
She hated being
same with my mom.
She would just hate being on her stomach, and
she did worse. It didn't help whatsoever.
Yeah, it's not worth whatever benefit you think she's getting from it. She's not. Don't do it. And there was one day they said, well, you can come up and look at them through the window.
Yeah.
And it felt like the nurse social worker came and met us, and she kept saying, well, they're getting everything ready.
Yeah.
And we were kind of like, what do they have to get ready?
Oh, there's a cleanup process. Yeah.
Yeah, but they were in the ICU room. They were still alive. Like, what are you, it almost felt like they were hiding.
Yeah.
And
if I can give you any peace, I hope that this is what they meant. I saw my mom proned, face down, in like a pool of her own like vial, and it was torturous. And more family was coming behind me to see her. And I said, I know you're so busy, but can you please prepare her like body and get her ready? And so they unproned her. They like cleaned her up. They like got her hair. I hope that they wanted to get her ready for you to not have to carry some of that pain. Maybe you'll never know.
So, because my mom was still prone when I saw her. So all I saw was the back of her head. Yeah. My aunt was not.
Yeah.
And, they gave us, a couple minutes at the window.
Yeah.
And they let me pick up my mom's jewelry.
Yeah. Her belongings. Yeah.
Her belongings. Yeah. So, I mean, it was still so isolating that like.
Yeah. You're right there.
I was right there. And it's like, can you at least open the door so I can say something to her? Just open. that door and let me tell her I am here.
I know.
And I had never remembered I had done this until later. But every day while she was sedated, I would text her.
Yeah.
Because it was all I had were
Me too. Yeah.
these texts that I wasn't getting.
Yeah.
Of, Mom, I'm here. I'm here.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I would send her, all the pictures of the kids I was getting through.
Yep.
Even though
a little update on the day. You're fighting so hard. Your nurse said this. Like, the kids had this at school today. I have the same text.
Yeah. And she, and I had to reset my phone. Like, I know, like, for a while there, I was like living for Facebook memories.
Yeah.
Just to see my mom. It was like this little magical moment.
Yes.
Of Facebook that I had every day. And on Christmas Eve, the Christmas Eve after she died, so 2021, I got an email that said, excuse her.
It's okay.
It said, if it was from, a scammer, and they're like, you have to pay me $1,700.
Oh my God.
Or we're going to release all your porn, which I didn't make, to your coworkers. And right after I got that email, my Facebook shut down.
Oh.
And we tried everything for months to get it back. Like, we ended up spending like $300-$400 just so I could get those Facebook memories of my mom.
Yeah.
And we were not able to get it back.
Oh God.
And then, when I hung on to those text messages then,
yeah,
like those last text messages from her. And then when I had to reset my phone, I lost it all.
Yeah.
So, like this loss just kept going on where I can hang on to these Facebook memories at least.
Yeah, something.
Yeah, I mean, I did something with my mom every day. So there was always a memory there.
Yeah.
With my mom and Facebook memories. And then, I can read through these, through these posts and these texts. And, eventually I'd lost all that.
Oh, so tough.
Yeah, I mean, for this guy wanted $1,700.
Oh my God.
And he had taken the one thing, like it was Christmas and I can go back and see all my memories of my mom on Facebook.
Yeah.
Tomorrow. Like tomorrow, tomorrow's Christmas Day.
Yeah.
First thing I'm going to do is get on Facebook and look at all those years of memories I have with my mom.
Yeah.
And he took that from me.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
The first,
God.
Like, I mean, there's a guy out there who was threatening me with porn and $1,700 that has like no idea.
Yeah, what he's taken from you.
Yeah. And my family's trying to make it better. Like, they tag me in all those posts that I had tagged them in and stuff. So like,
yeah,
I can see it and stuff, but it's not the same as having those direct conversations with my mom.
Yeah,
Every day.
Yeah. Oh, God. It's so tough. It's like, I think the little things that we just like hold on to just to like keep surviving almost sometimes, It's so tough. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on and telling your story and being so open about your struggles. And I just like for the people that are out there listening, if you relate to this, again, like you're not alone. We're two examples of somebody who's been through it. And every time I do this, like I identify with somebody's story so much. And I just thank you for being so open. It means the world.
Well, thank you for doing this. Somebody's had to do it. And thank you for taking up that mantle. And I mean, you seem so put together and strong right now, but you now have my Facebook. If you're not strong ever, you can get a hold of me.
Yes, and same to you. I still talk to so many people, that I've interviewed because we're like in this club that we didn't choose to join, but we're all in it together. So if you ever need anything, and that goes for anybody that's listening, sometimes we get messages from people. And I'll tell you too, the support for this podcast has come from people I never even knew needed it. Like, people that I'm just kind of general acquaintances that would like reach out and be like, thank you. Like, I listened, I want to like embrace a different perspective, or like I was feeling so down. It's like around the holidays, like just people I would never, expect. And so it's like also too, don't be afraid to like share your story. This is not, for you, obviously you shared your story, but for other people, because your pain can heal others,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's just like, just saying things out loud. You're just like, okay, somebody else going through this too. Like, I remember I got home from grief group and it was like all the things that you may be experiencing from like grief, and like brain fog was one of them. I went super early on after I lost my mom, and I got home to my husband. I was like, I'm not crazy. Like,
Yeah, you get like knowing that
this is normal.
yeah, that it's normal, and it's because I felt so abnormal for what.
Yeah.
And I was so scared to show any of that I stuffed it all down until,
Yeah.
And nobody should have to go through that.
No.
And what you're doing with this broadcast is making less people go through that.
Thank you.
And I'm sure your mother is insanely proud of you for doing
Thank
it.
you. And you're making it out the other side of all this, and your mom and aunt are really proud.